The Trump administration has instructed the Justice Department to monitor polling sites in California and New Jersey during next week's elections. The New York Times reports both states' Republican officials are the ones asking for it, citing complaints about security cameras, voter list accuracy, and, quote, reports of irregularities with ballots. Local election officials say they will cooperate with the DOJ's oversight, but California state Democrats are accusing the Trump administration of targeting competitive jurisdictions that could turn into key wins for the Republicans, potentially. Joining us now, Democratic strategist, pollster, and MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher, New York Times opinion columnist David French, and Tim Ryan, who is back with us. So, David, these irregularities, these polling monitors, it's not unusual to monitor polls. But in this heightened moment, why are people concerned?
Well, I mean, it's not unusual to monitor polls. The thing that makes things unusual are the widespread conspiracy theories. In other words, monitoring with no actually really good reason to monitor. And I'm actually less concerned about the monitoring itself than what follows next, because when you have a president who is absolutely convinced that he had an election taken from him because of, for example, mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, I'm really concerned that what you're going to see is an attempt to cast aspersions on any negative electoral outcome in which mail-in ballots are key or indispensable. And a lot of states have a lot of mail-in ballots. So I think this is a leading edge indicator that sort of that conspiracy warped view of elections from 2020 is still sadly alive and well in the year 2025.
So here's the hard part about it. When you start talking about the concern for what the Republicans may do, and the Republicans are talking about the irregularities, don't you get into a situation, David, where everyone kind of stops believing in free and fair elections? Everyone feels like there's a conspiracy out there?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're talking about here is just really undermining any confidence in the outcome of an election. I mean, we were already in a polarized place 10, 15 years ago. I remember getting emails from people saying, was the Romney election loss really legitimate? And that was in 2012. And since that time, it's only gotten worse. And so if you have a view that says that any form of election other than the precise form that I want, whether it's in person or absentee or mail-in, whatever, that any form of election other than the one I absolutely want is going to be by nature illegitimate, much less that any time I lose, it might be illegitimate. What you're doing is you're just devastating public acceptance of election results, especially election results they don't like.
Yeah, I mean, here's Trump talking about the election in 2020 here on Truth Social. What's worse, the NBA players cheating at cards and probably much else, or the Democrats cheating on elections, he says. You laugh, but he knows how to get your attention on something. I hope the DOJ pursues this with as much gusto, he puts that in quotes for some reason, as befitting the biggest scandal in American history. If not, it'll happen again. So he's definitely putting it out there as well. Cornell, let's talk about what's on the ballot, what's at stake here. California's Prop 50. This is the ballot measure that asks voters to revise California's congressional districts to favor Democrats. This is the redistricting in response to Texas. There's also the race for New Jersey governor with Mikey Sherrill running against Jack Ciattarelli, and it's a pretty close race to succeed Phil Murphy. If you live in the tri-state area, you have seen a lot of ads about this race. How close do you expect both of these things to be? Take them one by one.
Well, I'm sorry, Katie. First, I got to give some context around this because I think it's missing for our viewers. Sure, the Department of Justice have monitored elections in the past, but why have they monitored elections in the past? They've monitored elections in the past primarily to make sure that voters of color and marginalized groups aren't being disenfranchised. They've monitored elections in the past to make sure that the Voting Rights Act is actually being enforced, and that people aren't being disenfranchised who've historically been, pushed away from the polls or attempts to sort of quiet their political voice. This is not that, right? And as the AG in New Jersey said, they're not even attempting to come up with a credible reason for doing this. And you cannot ignore the fact that under the Trump administration, the Civil Rights Department has been completely eviscerated, right? You've had career attorneys, both Republican and Democrat, leave because they are eroding and eviscerating the Civil Rights Department, and in fact changing its mission away from protecting and looking out for the rights of historically disenfranchised people, and pulling back policies and legislation that have been approved by both Democrats and Republicans for decades to try to protect people's voting rights and to try to make sure people aren't disenfranchised. And that, to me, is really, really problematic about what you're seeing here. And they're really trying to undermine the sort of our belief in our election system. And now all of a sudden, the historical groups that have been disenfranchised, they're the bad guys in this conversation. All is foul and all is fair. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, no, that is that's good context, and I'm glad you brought it up. And it reminds me of Donald Trump talking about watching the polling sites in places like Philadelphia and all of the implications of that. But I do want to ask again about why we're focused on these races in these states. You have the Mikey Sherrill race and the Prop 50 ballot measure. Are they close, Cornel?
Well, look, we don't have blowout elections in this country. We just don't. Structurally, most elections in this country are close. So I suspect that Sherrill will prevail in New Jersey, and I think Democrats will prevail in Virginia as well, because quite frankly, there's a lot of voters out there, especially middle of the road voters, who are angry about what they're seeing from Trump and Republicans. And of course, what's happening in California is a countermeasure to sort of try to, balance what they're doing in Texas and now in North Carolina and apparently in Indiana. And of course, Republicans don't want that to succeed, because look, if we can try to counterbalance the seats they're trying to rig and gerrymander in other parts of the country, if we can try to balance that with the same thing in California, it certainly helps Democrats. But again, Katie, we've talked about this before. It's still a race to the bottom.
Yeah, on that same topic of just losing trust broadly among all parties, how do you fight against that? How do you both run candidates that you think are going to win, Tim, while also convincing the public that the results are going to be trustworthy? How do Democrats both run candidates that are going to make things better and, maybe even break or fix the system while also maintaining that the system works?
Yeah, it's a hell of a needle to thread, isn't it? I mean, we're just in uncharted waters here. So I think running candidates that are trustworthy, I think, is a big part of it. And I think, just to kind of build on what Cornel was saying, and I'm glad he put everything into context, it's that Trump with independent voters now is starting to slip. You're really starting to see it in his independent voter numbers. And I think the previous segment that we had, the dust up with the cattle ranchers, the dust up with the rural voters, now clearly going to two Democratic states to really, regardless of what level they interfere, they're already interfering by being there for no particular reason. These are the exact things that I think, and Cornel would know best, but independent voters really don't like. I think that the chaos abroad, the bailouts abroad, the division, all the stuff I just mentioned, and now it's being escalated from, I'm going to try to pretend that I didn't really lose an election in 2020 because of my ego and it's bad for my brand and it was all personal to him, to escalate that to, no, we're now actually going to act like there's real problems and we are going to try to influence the elections. That's a huge escalation. And so I think Trump's playing with fire here, and we kind of got to ride this thing out a little bit. I mean, you speak out, you do everything that we need to do, but at the same time, let him continue to hang himself.
All right, Tim Ryan, Cornel Belcher, David French. Although, David, you're not going far. Everybody, thank you very much.